This is RangerBestTower, and as his name implies, he intends to prove that Ranger is the greatest tower in TDX. To prove this, he is going to use the Ranger Towers to beat the newly released Endless mode. If Ranger truly is the greatest tower, he shouldn't have a problem with it, right? I started out by hopping into my beloved oil rig, as I attempted to solo Endless, with the greatest loadout of all time. I began by placing golden Rangers on the crates, so future avatars would be within range. The early game, as expected, was a breeze, as I placed a Ranger to improve our chances. The disposalists were a problem with their many spawns, and we did begin to struggle a bit with the enemies. Long story short, Plague Doctor's spawns ended up being a huge problem, which ultimately resulted in my loss. After rewinding, things looked hopeful as we chipped down Plague Doctor's HP quickly. Unfortunately, the spawns ended up making it to the end again, making it clear I wasn't winning. Since Ranger surely wasn't a bad tower, I knew the number of players was to blame. I decided to recruit 2 members of my Discord server, linked in the pinned comment, to help assist me in triumphing over Endless. The early game was very easy thanks to a Ranger I placed. The Golden Rangers did help as well, I guess. With our improved defense, the disposalists weren't a problem. We truly had the perfect early game at hand. Eventually, we were just absolutely shredding, and my confidence was high. Unfortunately, Plague Doctor's spawns put my ego in check. We ended up losing to them, which forced me to rewind. This time, we shredded Plague Doctor with the help of an AC-130. Contrary to Plague Doctor, I barely even had time to register revived Plague Doctor's arrival before he lost a third of his health. He didn't make it far. By now, our defense was impeccable, and my confidence had been restored. We even seemed to be doing somewhat decent against Eradicator, until I remembered avatars existed. Thankfully, we barely managed to kill them all. Unfortunately, there were even more avatars on MK2's wave. Not to mention, we were already struggling with MK2 himself. Even after rewinding again, we were unable to win and ultimately gave up. These back-to-back losses began to give RangerBestTower some doubt. He began to wonder if Ranger truly was a good tower. He even considered changing his display name to Golden Jug Best Tower. He decided to attempt the 4 main modes with purely Rangers to help him rediscover his faith with the tower. I decided to do the easy mode round on Deserted Island to help spice up the stakes. The early game, as expected, was absolutely shredded, and my confidence was at an all-time high. At least until we started struggling a ton, then ended up leaking a ton of enemies and losing at wave 23. At which point I died again, and again. Which definitely wasn't very motivating to RangerBestTower. I eventually made it to Plague Doctor, at which point we started to shred, until we leaked him at 5k health. Thankfully, we finally managed to win in the next attempt. I went into the intermediate mode round believing that using just the base Ranger tower could be enough. The early game was easy as expected from Ranger. That single Ranger in the corner was absolutely carrying the game. Until the multipliers came, and it wasn't. Our struggles became evident as enemies pushed our boundaries. I ended up going into Predator not confident at all, which turned up true as he passed my Rangers. Despite my desperate efforts, I wasn't able to chip down his health, and I was forced to rewind with my hard-earned gold. However, this time we seemed to be chipping down at Predator's health at an alarming rate. We ultimately ended up killing him before he got far. Eradicator, however, I knew was going to be a challenge. I unfortunately ended up barely leaking him with under 20k health to spare, resulting in a loss, and more of my gold spent to rewind. However, like Predator, on the second attempt, we started shredding him like there was no tomorrow. It wasn't long until he was flying back into the sky to Mama Xenon. I went into Elite, allowing myself to use all 3 Ranger towers, not expecting much of a struggle, especially with my Ranger placed in his signature spot. Golden Ranger was carrying the early game along with him, until they stopped carrying and started leaking. We ended up being overwhelmed and lost once more, forcing me to rewind as always. Then we lost again to revived abominations. Thankfully, after the rewind, we were able to shred the wave with little to no problems dealing with them. Revived Plague Doctor spawned, and I wasn't too confident considering our past failures. However, we shockingly ended up shredding the boss, killing him on our first attempt and earning ourselves a victory. I decided that for Expert, I wanted to reunite our team. As always, the early game went amazingly smooth with our 3 golden rangers. The ranger in the corner, I'm calling him Gerald, was also carrying hard. Even the night enemy was being shredded. The enemies did, however, begin to push. While this was happening, I just happened to be AFK. We ended up being killed by what I believe to be elite grenadier spawns. Not long after, the rushers were pushing past as well, resulting in yet another loss, causing me to deplete my gold supply even further. We ended up leaking again, but this time we just tanked it. After those losses, I definitely didn't feel prepared for the 3 predators, but we ended up making quick work of them. RangerBestTower's old nemesis MK2 spawned and purposefully eradicated all rangers placed. However, the power of Golden Ranger was unable to be overcome so easily. We were absolutely shredding him, with no hope of him succeeding, until RangerBestTower once again proved Ranger was the best tower. With Eradicator MK2's death returned RangerBestTower's faith in Ranger. And if you disagree that Ranger is the best tower, you'd best hope that at the very least you're subscribed.